everyone, and welcome to Not Your Average Data Session. So I'm Jack Swayne, and I'm very honored to be here talking about data with you all today. But before I start, I've just got to tell a little story about how this kind of came about. And as we were preparing for this summit, the marketing team gave me a call, it's a few months ago, and they asked me, would I like to do a main stage presentation at the iProspect Client Summit? And I was like, absolutely, I would love to. They said, what would you like to talk about? I was thinking, well, we've been doing some really interesting things with data over the last year. I'd love to share some stories about, how we've been leveraging data to drive better performance for a lot of our clients. And they said, I think that's a really good idea. You should do that. And I was like, so what's the rest of the setup? Who else is speaking? When will I be speaking? They said it was on a Wednesday. In the morning, Jeremy will do his intro. Then we've got a keynote speaker. And then there'll be afternoon sessions. You'll be part of that. And I was like, great. Who's the keynote speaker? They were like, Stephen Dubner. And I was like, Stephen Dubner, the co-author of Freakonomics. They were like, yeah. And I was like, the co-author of Freakonomics, who is probably one of the most interesting men in the world who can talk about data. And they were like, yeah. And they were like, okay, and then you want me to come on and talk about data. And I was, so I was like, okay, I'll see what I can do. So just to set expectations, I'll do my best. But last year, in Austin, we had a session on data, and it was really about how we could leverage data for better personalization as we look to the future. And we had an incredible panel of very intelligent people talking about, how they're thinking about data as we move to the future. And what has been really interesting in the last year is I think we've kind of got to that point where now we're really starting to see the full potential of how we can use data to be more relevant and drive better performance. And so this year is going to be slightly different. I'm just going to do, a 10-minute intro, and then we actually have Emily Schubert coming on, who's from Gap, who's going to come and talk about how she's been thinking about data and how, some examples of brands that are doing it really well, some examples of brands that maybe are not doing it so well, and then, how we all really need to think about organizing data so that we can make sense of it to be more relevant. But to begin with, it's not your average data session. So Emily and I were talking about, well, what is an average data session? And we've all been in those meetings, and we've all been to those talks and those conferences where sometimes it's a bit like a game of bingo. And everyone's just checking off buzzwords of different things around data, which, are all fantastic, and they're buzzwords for a reason, because they are the things that's really driving our industry and driving performance when we think about data. But sometimes they lack a little bit of meaning. So what I thought I'd do to test ourselves, and we may fail miserably, is write down kind of the biggest buzzwords within big data at the moment, and put them out on the tables. There should be at least one on each of your table. And if we say any of them, cross them off. The rules of bingo. If you make a horizontal line, a diagonal line, a vertical line, then feel free to shout out bingo, or as it's also known as BS bingo. And I expect if that happens, myself and Emily, or probably just me, will have to do some sort of forfeit, and we can work that forfeit out at the bar later. Okay, cool. So to get into it, we're talking about data today because, data has really evolved, and it's evolved at an alarming rate. And just the opportunity within data is now absolutely here for us as brands and marketers to be much more relevant, and that's what's really driving digital performance. And, as we think about data, and as marketers, we're constantly kind of weighing up the balance between what is the cost or the effort and what is the actual benefit. And Stephen actually talked about it, with every benefit, there's always a cost or some effort that goes into it. And I think in the last few years, what's been a real challenge with data is that the cost or the effort that has to go into data in kind of cleansing it and organizing it and making it actually useful to your, digital campaigns across your bought, own, and earn channels has been really, really great, and we're not necessarily seeing the benefit. But I think we've reached the point now where the benefits absolutely outweigh the effort. And that's why I'm really excited to be kind of talking about it today with you all. And the reason we're starting to see a lot of the benefits of it is because we're starting to use data to allow us to be more relevant as brands and more relevant to people. And by being more relevant, it means that we're creating much more meaningful experiences with people. And those meaningful experiences are existing, in all different aspects of our lives, across different bought, owned, and earned channels. They're happening online, and they're also happening offline. And that's really exciting for us, and it's really important for us because, as we all know, the world has kind of reorganized itself around people. And people are now in control, and they're the ones who are self-selecting the content or the content that they're watching, the content that they're consuming, the brands that they engage with. But more importantly, they're kind of self-selecting the brands and the content that they don't want to engage with. So unless we're relevant and creating these meaningful experiences for people, then there's no way of us actually talking to them and communicating to them and getting them to buy our stuff. So, I think these meaningful experiences are starting to be created in lots of different places through the use of data. So, there's the big flashy ideas like the fridge that, talks to you and tells you when you're out of milk. Or in this example, General Electric and Qualcomm have just come together and they've created a LED light that can talk to your smartphone. And so this LED light can go in any light bulb, and it emits a kind of some flashes that talk to your smartphone that can't be seen by the human eye. But that's kind of really exciting because, if you can connect that, in any place that has a light bulb, so in your store, for example, it can exactly pinpoint where you are within that store. And if you have your shopping list on your smartphone and it's talking to your smartphone, it can guide you around that store and, start to recommend, complementary products. And that's all very, very cool stuff. Or you could be walking around the store and there's updating the digital display, in real time based on who you are, of what they understand of who you are because of the smartphone. But, that is very exciting, and I think that's more kind of future-looking. But, the whole point of what we're kind of talking about this summit are the things that we can actually do now, and where we're seeing the use of data really to drive the best possible digital performance. And, we're not necessarily going to go back to our desks on Monday and start putting LED, lights in light bulbs and all of that kind of stuff, or that would be quite fun. But we're going to be starting thinking about the channels that we actually manage every single day. And to be honest, those are the channels that are benefiting the most from the proper use of data. Like, if you take PLAs as an example, if we think about search and we think of PLAs, the use of data within product listing ads within Google is all about making sure we're surfacing the most relevant product when someone is there ready to buy it. And, there's lots of different ways that people can search and a lot more, different specifics that people are actually going to search for. And therefore, we need to have our data organized in the best possible way to allow us to match that query. So, in this example, this is from Converse, where it's like, buy Converse Chuck Taylors for toddlers of size 2. And, what you can see in terms of the middle one, the PLA that Converse is doing, they've got all of that relevant data in there. It talks about the brand. It's got the right image. You can clearly see that that's a toddler's shoe. It says that it's a toddler. It's a size 2, and it's got the price and the website. Now, that has got more relevant information on it than any of the other PLAs that are down there. And it's because it's surfacing more relevant information as used by structured data. That's why it's getting a higher click-through rate than all the other ads, and that's why it's getting a higher conversion rate. So it's really simple things like that you have uses of data that are really powering performance as we start to look to be more and more relevant. And then we're starting to be able to do this across multiple different channels. But, even though it's very simple in the execution, it's not that easy to organize your data because there's just so much data out there. And, there's more and more data being created every day because of, the proliferation of connected devices and the fact that we have incredible infrastructure allows us to connect those devices to the internet through 4G and high-speed broadband and all of those incredible things, which means that we're connected and we can get online any place, anytime, anywhere. And that's creating loads of data. So for us, it's about understanding what are those different data sets that actually make sense for us as marketers as we want to be more relevant to them. And we think about it in 3 different ways. The first is around behavioral data. And now behavioral data is nothing new. It's, we're all kind of creating these personal, and Sam mentioned it, personal ecosystems based on all the way that we behave online. We're suddenly getting all this information based on the things that we do about who we are as people, what, we're really interested in, but more importantly, the things we buy and where we buy them. But what's kind of exciting about, and we've been leveraging behavioral data for years within, behavioral targeting within display, but kind of where behavioral data is going is starting to connect, two different types of behavioral data. So if you take what Facebook's doing with, with your CRM data, CRM data is really useful because it helps us understand what are, who our customers are and what are the products that they're buying. Facebook's really useful because we get a really deep insight into who people are because people share so much information about who they are on Facebook, along with all the things they like, from the TV shows to the films to even the brands. And when we start connecting those two, it allows us to be a lot more relevant because, if someone's been on your website and has been looking at sneakers, for example, we're able to segment them and make sure that we're actually delivering that really relevant sneaker product information within a really scalable platform like Facebook. And then Facebook's giving more information back about our customers and our CRM data because it's so rich in terms of who real people are. And, I think, again, Sam said it really nicely, is like, we've got all of this data, but behind every data point is a person. And what our goal is throughout all of this behavioral data is to really understand more about people, because the more that we understand about people, the more relevant we can be and the better performance we can drive. But there's also your product data. And no matter what your product is, there's a rich amount of data that goes behind it. And there's a real opportunity to be, using that in a better way. So yes, we want to surface all the right product attributes around whether it's a credit card or whether it's a hotel room or whether it's a pair of Ray-Ban sunglasses. But there's also other really interesting information about your product that, data tells us. Things like, is it even in stock? Like, it seems overly simple, but if it's not in stock on that day, then we shouldn't be running paid search campaign behind it or a paid social campaign. Or what is the margin on your different products? Are those products with higher margins? Do we want to push those out more because we get a higher profit from those things? So being able to use product in that way helps us to make actual budget decisions and optimization decisions, which can really help us drive more and more performance. And then finally, there's data triggers. So this could be any piece of data that is essentially potentially driving demand for your product or your service. This could come from anywhere. If you think of, xe.com, and we're looking at exchange rates, the US dollar continues to kind of strengthen against the euro. That could be really interesting if you are a hotelier in Europe, or you are an airline that flies to Europe, and because of that, people might be more willing to travel to that place. Therefore, you might be more willing to bid more on those, on that inventory or those keywords around travel to Europe. Or it could be for sunglasses, and when the sun comes out, or looking at the searches for hay fever within WebMD if you're a pharmaceutical company. Actually the opportunities are kind of endless, but it's really about trying to make the most of these opportunities and organizing your data in this way. And the organization data is probably the biggest challenge overall to really leveraging it. And as you can see, it can be a bit of a mess, and it's really hard. It's relatively easy to put a load of slides together talking about three very neat data sets, but actually organizing it is the problem, and it's going to become more and more difficult because right now in 2015, there's almost one connected device that's creating all this data for every person, but as we look ahead to 2020, which is actually only 4.5 years away, there's going to be 500 million more people, but 10 times the amount of connected devices. So that means so much more data, which is great. And as we think about that kind of cost versus benefit analysis, that benefit is going to become even greater, but it's going to need an even greater need for organization, and why we need to start organizing our data right now. And so, that is why certainly at iProspect, we've really focused on our structured data and feeds technology to be allowed to start organizing that data. So no matter whether it's behavioral data, product data, or data triggers, what SD Manager allows us to do is the actually cleansing of that data. So at the moment, we're kind of managing 16 million different SKUs, optimizing the content, so making sure that the data that we're getting from your product data is accurate as possible, but also formatting that data for all of our different partners, because all of our partners, kind of annoyingly, want it in kind of different formats. And so that becomes a really important part. And then having the way of pushing out that data to make it make sense for all those different partners, whether it's using that behavioral data within our the media partners that we're using, whether it's using that product data for our shopping partners, or those data triggers to allow us to make better bid optimization. But we feel really good about this because we've already started doing it. And as I said at the beginning, in the last year, we've been starting to leverage data more and more, and we're seeing really, really good results with it. And, just to use 3 examples, one from each, when we look at behavioral data, we did with Under Armour, and Brittany's going to talk about it in more depth, but we actually matched, we looked on their CRM data and worked out all the people that had bought golfing apparel. Gribby, you may want some of this, sorry. Everything's about golf today. So, the golfing apparel, but then, when Jordan Spieth won the Masters, who is sponsored by Under Armour, we were able to remarket all those people within Facebook and Twitter with, the Jordan Spieth polo, and that, because it was so relevant and so timely, it drove incredible results. And we sold out of all of those, or all of Under Armour's polos, which is fantastic. With product data, I showed you the Converse example earlier. And the thing we added from Converse, it had all the right product information, but we added the actual product type, so the Chuck Taylors, and also the size to create that more meaningful experience. Because we've all kind of been, when you looked around and you've been shoe shopping and, in the kind of offline world, and you've actually finally found a pair of shoes that you want, and then they don't have it in your size is incredibly annoying. So to be able to get rid of that experience and make it more meaningful within the digital world is incredibly powerful. And just by adding the size of the shoe, we're seeing a 44% increase in revenue, which is fantastic. And then data triggers, Hilton, who those of you who were here last year would have heard about it, but when flights are cancelled and we see a certain amount of flight cancellations in a certain area, there's an increase in demand for hotel rooms at last minute. So we want to make sure when that happens, Hilton is number 1 and bid more within that space so that we can capture all of that demand, and that drives incredible revenue. But across all of them, there really is a huge opportunity, and that's why we're so excited about data now, because it really is the benefit outweighing the cost or the effort. And we're seeing across all of it, there's on average you should expect a kind of 20% increase, and that's huge when you think about the revenue that you're already driving from online channels, and that's why we're so excited about it. So that's kind of enough from me. I'm now going to introduce Emily Schubert from Gap, and she is the Digital Online Channel Director, and please give her a warm welcome.
Thank you.
Okay. Hi, Emily. Thank you very much for joining us in the Not Your Average Data session. I think we're doing pretty well so far on the buzzwords, so let's try and keep it going. We'll see. So do you mind just introducing yourself, and for those who don't know you, just give a bit about your background?
Sure. So I've been in the performance marketing field for almost 20 years now. I've been with The Gap for 3 years. I oversee the global channel marketing team, and have also overseen the display team at one period. So I have a long time history of digital marketing and seeing the agency evolve. I was telling a Googler this morning that I remember buying Google on a CPM, so that tells you how long I've been doing this. With all the data we have, though, we can do a lot more today.
Absolutely. So over the years, there's obviously been more data and more data become made available. How do you look at it and start to try and make sense of all of that different data that's made available to you?
So I think the important thing is to not become overwhelmed by how much data there is, because you can get really sidetracked and there can be analysis paralysis. And I think it goes back to kind of what Stephen was saying this morning, don't be afraid to ask the simple question or the dumb question. And it's, what are we trying to do as a company? And most of us are trying to deliver value to our customers, whoever they are, whether they're businesses or actual end consumers. And so in thinking of that framework, I look at the data kind of in three different sets, similar to what you were saying. There's the who, that's our CRM data, our customer data, our transaction database, everything we know about people who buy or have bought from us in the past. Then there's the what, that's our product data, it's our inventory levels, it's our pricing, it's how fresh or stale the inventory is, it's store data, and that's what we're trying to sell. And then there's the where, and this is usually third-party data either from your publisher, or it could even be a third-party data service like an Experian, or a service like that. So really focusing on the who, what, where, going back to basics, that kind of helps create a framework. And if you focus on what value you're trying to deliver and what data points can support that, it can make your work a lot more focused.
That makes a lot of sense. So does that, by kind of organizing data in that way, does that help to kind of develop those meaningful experience that we were kind of talking about earlier?
Yeah, absolutely. I think your example with PLAs and LIAs in search is great. Customers love it when they know that, in Gap's case, a specific T-shirt or pair of jeans is available in their size nearby. We see a lot of searching happening, particularly on Black Friday, and it's great to be able to push the inventory out to consumers. And it also, can really deliver value by showing likelihood suggestions, using algorithmic data, there's a buzzword, to say, okay, if you bought jeans, maybe you want a T-shirt. So that's where you deliver value. And
of those meaningful experiences, is it normally the simplest ones that seem to work the most effectively?
I think so. I think right now, I think an example of a poor use of data is my Nest. It tries to outsmart me to save energy, but I would actually rather be warm than be energy efficient. So it doesn't understand what my end goal is, and I actually went back to my cheap Honeywell
That's amazing.
thermostat. Sorry, Googlers out there.
So when they're not understanding you as a person, but rather than they're trying to just understand what everyone wants, it doesn't necessarily deliver for your needs, like in that Nest example. That makes a lot of sense. So what about kind of miserable experience, bad uses of data? We talk a lot about meaningful experiences, and you talk about PLAs and LIAs, and you've already talked about a kind of miserable experience with the Nest, but are there brands that sometimes get it wrong with data and kind of use it to not create the best experience possible?
Yeah, so the thing I'm noticing a lot right now is email remarketing. When I've unsubscribed from an email list and I'm still getting emails because I had to go check a competitor's website, or I did a search, or I was actually posting a picture of a product I bought on social media, so then I get remarketed through display on a product I just purchased. And I've moved on from that product. I need the next thing, so stop selling me, put your impression caps on. And so I think that's a bad use of data, and how it really creates an obtrusive experience to the customer.
And when it is manipulative like that, it can leave such a bad impression for such a long time, can't it? Their intentions are, to drive that sale, but when it kind of goes wrong, it's not just the damage that it does by you not clicking on it, but it can really put you off that brand for quite a long time.
That's right.
Yeah, okay. So what about different channels and devices? So, we talk a lot about how we use product data for PLAs, for example. Does the data change depending on the kind of channel that you want to be advertising within? Does it change if you're using paid social or using display or, using affiliates? And does it change across device?
Yeah, so I think if you think about it in the context of the funnel, at the bottom of the funnel, you want to use things like pricing data, discounted inventory, margin data, and really ensure that the consumer transaction is not interrupted. I think when you think of upper funnel, you bring in third-party data, understanding of how the consumer behaves, what their likelihood is to buy your specific product. You may bring in data such as location, because they may be near a store, particularly if they're on their mobile device. The kind of experience you want to deliver is valuable information based on the fact that they're on the go. You may do more descriptive data based on time of day. You may focus more on advertising in, say, blogs because someone's on a commute time if they're in an urban area, but if they're in the car, you're not going to focus on consumers who do that. So, it really depends on the context of the device. So again, that you can deliver that valuable experience to the consumer.
Brilliant. And what about, so we've talked about, some brands who potentially aren't using data very well with their kind of email remarketing. Are there any brands that you really look up to and think, wow, they're doing such an amazing job with data right now?
Well, of course, Amazon's the retailer we love to hate. They know a lot about us. All of us shop there, and they have great recommendations. They understand if you've bought something as a gift. They understand the frequency with which you buy, what delivery method you want, and they just really make it super seamless to transact with them. It's always like 2 to 3 clicks, whether you're on your mobile device, you're on your iPad, your desktop. So they actually do a really, really great job. But they also have a lot of data, and they're bringing it together in a meaningful way.
Yeah, definitely. And what about kind of brands who aren't necessarily within the online space, but in the offline space? Do you see any good uses of data, within the kind of the offline world?
Yeah. So I think offline brands are getting there. So the cases that I think are interesting to watch, but I just don't know if they're going to have scale and really hold are in San Francisco. There's a Rebecca Minkoff store, and they are using virtual walls, touch screens. All the sales associates have iPads so that they can check inventory levels. And you basically interact in this digital world in the store, and they only have a few items out on display, and most of the inventory is in the back. And while you're in the dressing room, it will recommend things that go with what you're trying on. She obviously sells a lot of purses, but there is clothing in this store, and so they'll put the blouse with the skirt or vice versa. So I think that's an interesting case to watch. I think Nordstrom does a really good job of CRM because they have a digital point of sale system, and bringing their data back into your email experience is, they're doing a good job of that in an uninvasive, non-creepy sort of way.
Interesting. That's great. So one of the things that we find is, certainly on the iProspect side and just also talking to our clients, is just getting access to the right data. Like, it seems to be one of the biggest barriers to be able to use it to be more relevant, to create more meaningful experiences. Do you have any advice for us or for, kind of other marketers about how we get better access to data? Because it seems to be so siloed and owned by so many different people, with one overall organization. You must have some interesting challenges at Gap as well in the same way, but would love your thoughts or advice around that.
Again, I think it goes back to ask questions and go talk to people. At Gap, we have 5 brands. We have multiple teams that handle data, whether it's big data, analytics, little data, reporting data, site data. Right on.
PJ?
That was a giveaway.
Just setting me up for my forfeit. Yeah. All right.
And I think it's really about going to talk to people who have similar business questions, again, that you have as a marketer within the company, and ensuring that teams are talking together. It's been really interesting as we've been doing some work in our display department. They were working on a business problem that the social team was also working on, and it turned out that the 2 different teams were having the same conversation with the same analyst, but independent of each other. So now we're all sitting at the table together having the same conversations. We brought the tech people in to help support it. We've been working with our iProspect feeds team when we're talking about product data, like what's our long-term vision. So it's really about having conversations of like what is out there, what's useful, what's not useful right now. Like we have this data, but maybe we just say we're just going to keep it over here until a good use for it comes up instead of trying to force it into a particular business problem. So just having those conversations and really bringing people together.
That's brilliant, because it must be happening the same thing in lots of other places all the time. So we just need to go and talk to people.
Yeah,
okay.
And the more data you have, the more context you have, right?
Absolutely.
So it gives you a better picture of who the consumer is. I think about the article that was in the New York Times a couple weeks ago that talked about the growth of athleisure, and Google had seen increased searches. But we don't know if those people are shoppers or they just want to know what athleisure is, or whether it's actually related to the purchase funnel. The tulle skirts was another example that started in San Francisco, and very cynically, my comment was, it's probably all the Burning Man people getting ready for their costumes why it started. And now it's a trend, obviously, but again, having more than one data point to make a decision is really important.
Right, and using data to identify those trends. So, unfortunately, I think we're out of time, but thank you so much for joining us, and thank you everyone very much for listening, and enjoy the rest of the afternoon.
Thank you.